Hello and welcome back to Daniel 11 and 7. We're going to pick up right where we left off, with the King of the North gaining power through the deceptive miracles that were outlined in Revelation 13 and receiving worship and influence over the secular and religious powers around the world. It will seem as though nothing will stand in his way. In speaking about the papacy during this time, John the Revelator describes the attitude of the papacy. In Revelation 18 verse 7, it says, "How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow." This verse gives us an insight into the King of the North's perspective, as he will once again regain control over the world, and in the process, he will undo all that the Protestant Reformation has accomplished. This will be the healing of the wound that is highlighted in Revelation, and it will seem as though nothing will stand in his way to regain control over the world. As we already read in Daniel 11:41 through 43, the King of the North will enter into the countries and the glorious land, and even Egypt will not escape. We already learned that the glorious land, the countries, and Egypt represent the fact that every man, woman, and child on earth, regardless of religion, race, or ethnicity, will be involved in this spiritual war. And even among God's commandment-keeping people, many will be overthrown. However, we also saw that some will indeed escape out of the King of the North's grasp. Despite his desire for all to receive the mark of the beast, the name of the beast, and the number of his name, there will be a few who escape, and this escape will be a direct result of what is outlined in Daniel 11 verse 44, which says, "But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many." This text highlights a scenario that will see tidings or messages that comes from the north and the east that will trouble the papacy as a potential threat to their influence. We've established that the central theme of the modern day war between the King of the North and the King of the South is centered on worship. So that means whatever these tidings are must necessarily be involved in counteracting the principles, ideologies, and doctrines of Romanism. Once again, we need to understand what these tidings would have meant to Daniel. And in order to do that, we'll go to the book of Isaiah, chapter 52, verse 7, which says, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace, that bringeth good tidings of good, that publisheth salvation, that saith unto Zion, thy God reigneth." We find a similar use of imagery in Romans chapter 10 that speaks about the gospel of peace and the glad tidings of good things. These tidings evidently represent the proclamation of the gospel of salvation to humanity. And more specifically, in the end time context, we find a special proclamation of the gospel referred to as the everlasting gospel. And these tidings are none other than the three angels' messages found in Revelation 14, which serve as a warning to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, that they should fear God and not man, that Babylon, also known as the King of the North, is fallen, and that if anyone receives the mark of the beast or the name of the beast, that God will dish out the punishment that men are trying to inflict upon other men. This warning message culminates in Revelation 18, verses 1 through 4, which says, "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities." This message in Revelation 18, known as the loud cry, will serve as Earth's final warning against Babylon, the King of the North, and this will cause the fury of Satan to be unleashed against the glorious land, which we have already identified as God's remnant church. We find this outlined in Revelation 12, verse 17, which says, "And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." As a result of Satan's fury, he will work through the King of the North to go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. This fury and this attempt to make away or take away many is basically an example of what will take place in Revelation 13 that states that those who do not receive the mark of the beast or the name of the beast or the number of his name will not be allowed to buy or sell. Because remember, the king of the north will have power over the ships representing commerce, and he will have power over the silver and gold and all the precious things of Egypt, representing the financial power of the once secular nations of the world. In addition to this, it will be declared that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Because remember, the king of the north has chariots and horsemen representing the judicial and military power of the world. And the Ethiopians and the Libyans, also representing the power of enforcement, will be at the king of the north steps to do his bidding. And as we already saw in verse 13 of Revelation 17, the nations of the world will have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. There's a very important note that we need to make in addition to what we have seen regarding the tidings that will come from the north and the east to trouble the papacy. In Daniel 11 verse 44, it says that the tidings will come from the north and the east. These words are not there by accident. God wants us to understand that the tidings of the everlasting gospel are coming directly from his throne in the north. We know this because in Isaiah 14 verse 13, it lets us know that God is worshipped in the sides of the north. And in Psalms 48 verse 2, it reflects this idea by letting us know that Jerusalem is the city of the great God on the sides of the north. Now that we know about the north, what about the east? The east is there to let us know how salvation will come for God's people, and we know salvation will come from the east because of Matthew chapter 24 verse 27, which says that Christ's appearing will be as the shining from the east to the west, and he's coming to save his people. We also find that in the Old Testament, when ancient Babylon was overthrown, it was overthrown by a Messiah-type figure named King Cyrus, who was a king that came from the east and conquered Babylon by drying up the Euphrates River. This imagery is reiterated in Revelation 16 verse 12 that discusses the final overthrow of modern-day spiritual Babylon by stating that the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. Those kings represent God coming to redeem his people from the persecution of the modern-day king of the north. Despite how overwhelming this situation looks for those who choose to remain faithful to God, he will intervene on behalf of the faithful. God will ultimately triumph over the king of the north and establish a kingdom of peace and righteousness. Before the establishment of God's kingdom, the king of the north will ultimately be defeated. But before his defeat, the king of the north has one more move that he will make in his attempt to win the spiritual war that will be waged on the entire world. And we will find out what that is in the last verse of Daniel 11. Hope to see you again for the conclusion.